are looking at a 5,000 share order.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Google Cloud Live. I'm Greg Baugues, and I lead the developer community team here at Google Cloud. If you were with us last week, you know we kicked off the series with the amazing Denise Kwan from the Gemini CLI team. We went through Gemini CLI getting started. We started all the way from installation and ended with vibe coding a game. So if you're just getting started, you can check out that recording online. Today, we're going to be diving into more advanced features of Gemini CLI, hooks and skills. We're also going to be taking a look at a feature that's now in preview, which is plan mode. And to help us go deeper on these features, I am thrilled to bring in Jack Wotherspoon. He works on the Gemini CLI team, knows these features better than just about anyone. Welcome to Google Cloud Live, Jack.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Excited to be here and excited to dive a little deeper and show off some features that people might not have tried before, as well as give them a sneak peek, like you said, at plan mode, which should come out in about a week or so.
Just in case we got folks joining us here, because we have so many viewers here across a whole bunch of different channels. If someone's joining us for the first time, they've never used Gemini CLI before, could you just give the brief sort of introduction to it? What is Gemini CLI? Why might a developer want to use it?
Yeah, for sure. Gemini CLI is a terminal agent, so it runs in your terminal like any other application. And really, it just gives you the power of the Gemini models directly in your terminal. So it has access to your files. It has access to other tools that you have installed on your machine. You can give it access to MCP servers and really extend its capabilities to really tailor it to whatever workflows you might be using it for. And it's really not only for developers. We really think that anybody can use Gemini CLI and get a lot of value out of it.
Awesome. And just for folks who are watching, give you a little bit of feel for what the next hour or so will be like. We're going to hit 3 points. We're going to talk about hooks. We're going to talk about skills. We're going to talk about plan mode. We're going to try to hit those, fairly succinctly up front. And then if you all have questions, we can dive deeper as there's interest and on the back half of the show or so. So maybe to kick us off, Jack, you could tell us a little bit about hooks.
Yeah. Before we dive into hooks, let's quickly touch on kind of the application that we'll be kind of demoing and showcasing all of these features within. So if we head over to my screen here, I've built out this nice little fun demo application called Memory Wall. Really, this is for myself personally. My wife always throws things. We have a physical kind of cork board on the side of our fridge that, any sticky notes or pictures we have, we throw on there. I'm always running out to the grocery store and forgetting to take a picture or look at it. I'm having to text her to send me, the recent updates on what's on the list. So I decided to create a kind of digital memory wall or bulletin board so that no matter if I'm on my phone, if I'm on my computer, I can have all of the recent to-dos visible for me. So we have this kind of memory wall, and this is actually an application that anyone watching, if they want to try out, I think we'll put the links in the chat. You can go over to memory-wall.web.app and actually try it out for yourself, create your own board, double click to add stuff. So if we want to go ahead, I can just double click here and we'll actually change this to photo. We'll go ahead and upload a photo. I want to go to Greece, so we'll get some inspiration here. We'll just go through this, upload it, and then we can go ahead and pin that to our board. There we go. We've added something to our memory board. But now let's dive into the fun stuff and talk about hooks a little more.
Jack, just real quick. So you built this, I'm assuming, with Gemini CLI?
Of course.
Yeah. And can I get like a feel, how long did it take you to build this?
Yeah, good question. Probably about 20 minutes or so. Really, it's a simple kind of Three.js and React application that I then just deployed to Firebase web hosting, as well as using Firebase for the storage and the images and things like that. So it probably took from start to finish about 20 to 25 minutes from idea to actually live deployed application.
That's wild.
So we'll switch over to my terminal application, and we'll start up Gemini CLI by quickly typing Gemini. And then we'll dive into hooks. You'll actually see a hook that I have already configured running on startup. So because with this application, like I said, it's kind of a React web server, we want to be able to test all of our changes before we deploy to production. So with that, we have a dev server, right? We can write npm run dev. And what I've actually done is added a hook. And what hooks are at a high level they are essentially scripts that you can run at different lifecycle points of Gemini CLI's agentic loop. So if we go ahead and actually just type hooks here, we can go ahead and see our configured hooks. So I actually have 2 hooks already configured. And there's those different event lifecycles like I talked about. So those can be like before a tool call. So it can match against certain tools and run your script, or it could be at the session start. So right here, we actually have a hook that executes a script at the beginning of any Gemini CLI session when we start up. And it's going to go ahead and actually check to see if our dev server is started and going to output that message to the screen so that we can get a warning or a heads up saying, hey, your dev server is not running. You need to go ahead and start it so that as we run through our session, if we want to test things out against our dev server, we can make sure it's running. Are you with me so far, Greg? Is there anything you think I should touch on a little deeper here?
This is great. You know what? Actually, I'll ask one question. What does like the hello world with hooks look like? Like, what is the maybe like the very first hook someone might build might look like?
Yeah, I would say to do things on edit or write. So when Gemini CLI is writing code, you can have a hook that matches kind of those 2 tool calls. So either editing or writing new code, and you can run things like a linter, right? So as Gemini CLI is creating that code, it's going to run like your lint. So it could be if you're in Python, like running, rough, or if you're in like Node, it could be just doing npm run lint.
Yeah.
So that way, if the agent is having any lint errors in the code it's generating, those will get picked up as soon as those calls are made, and then it'll actually continue on and fix them so that you don't have to run your builds later on and figure out that something broke.
Yeah, I feel, is it fair to say that this is sort of it gives you the ability to add deterministic behavior in the agentic loop, which often can feel a little bit too indeterministic?
Exactly. So you could have a different session start hook that would, maybe, do a summary of your last 5 Git commits and repositories. So if you're jumping back to a new project that you haven't touched on in a while, it can actually load those kind of context in at the beginning, and you can, then ask, or you could do a check for not having any console.log statements so that we make sure none of those get to production, right? So like things that you might not want to have to check, you can have those deterministic scripts run at those different points.
Awesome.
So if we actually jump over to the code here, how does it actually configure a hook? So like I said, in your settings.json, which is kind of your main configuration file for Gemini CLI, you have these hooks parameters, and then you have the different events. And in our documentation, you can see all these different events, but session start is the one I mentioned, where whenever you start a new session, it runs. So essentially, it's just a name, a type, which is command, and then the command to execute. So we have our start dev server script, and that just goes in a kind of wherever you want, but we have it in a hooks folder. And it's really just a bash script, but it could be a Python script, Node script, again, whatever kind of logic you want to run to check. And what we have configured is it's just going to check to see our React application, is it running on port 5173 or 5174. So it's a pretty basic hook. We're just checking, is there something running on these ports? And then we're going to go ahead and send Gemini CLI a different system message, which is what you see on screen. I'll show you in a sec. And either it's going to say, it's running, or it's going to say we're not running. And the fun thing here is we can actually pass context to Gemini CLI. So we can actually send this message into its context so that when we go ahead and do our first prompt, it'll actually have this information kind of already in the turn. So we can actually say the development server is not running. Please check if the user wants to run it in the background.
That's cool.
So we'll just go ahead and clear this. And so that's where that message is coming from, that script, right? It's checking, it's saying we don't have anything on port 5173. Go ahead and output the dev server is not running. So if we go ahead and send our first message, we can then ask it to go ahead and run the dev server in the background for us. And it's going to go ahead and ask us if it wants to run the command. We'll go ahead and allow that. And you can see this is one of the newer features that a lot of folks have asked for here, is we can actually see that this was run in the background. So prior, this would actually kind of block, and Gemini CLI would kind of be waiting on the current task that's executing. Now it has the ability to put those into the background. So Gemini CLI can actually very smartly detect whether or not things like dev servers or long-running processes, if those can get put to the background, or you can put them to the background yourself with Control+B.
That's
So we'll
super helpful.
And actually press Control+B. We can pull it up. And you can also see down here on the right, you'll actually know when background shells are running. So you can actually see that this one background task is running. And you can monitor it here by doing Control+B.
I feel like that's so helpful, because I feel like in the past, I felt like I needed to start the servers myself in a different terminal because Gemini CLI would get stuck on those. And so now I can start it up, throw it in the background, and then continue iterating and building.
Yeah, you can see now that we refresh on our local host, we can see that we have dev server is running. We can see our memorable application. So now we can kind of continue on and test things before we push to production.
And so this version here, this is running locally.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So just to make sure I'm understanding this right. So for our hook, there's a set of predefined events. Folks can find what all those events, all those triggers are in the docs. And then you're going to define your hooks in JSON. When that event is triggered, Gemini CLI is going to send some JSON, like execute your command, execute your script, and pass along some JSON. Your script's going to do some stuff, and then your script's going to pass back JSON to Gemini CLI to tell it how to proceed.
Yeah, exactly. The hooks kind of are based off of just your standard input and output.
Yep.
So they're well structured. You have things like the system message, which is what you see appear in the UI. So we saw that the dev server is not running get published. And then we have other kind of, depending on the hook, other context you can pass it. So it could be something like a after agent hook, which is helpful for things like the viral Ralph loops. You can actually have the agent not stop, continue on when normally it would have just, stopped. You can have it continue on and actually send it another prompt to continue working and things like that. So it's very customizable. And that's the point of hooks, is that if something's not supported in Gemini CLI, some type of functionality, there's a really good chance that you can extend Gemini CLI through hooks to accomplish that.
Awesome. One use case I've seen folks use hooks for is to set up custom sounds when Gemini is like waiting for their input. Are there any other fun ones from the community that you've seen folks use?
Yeah, I've seen some fun ones with actually kind of turning into an orchestrator. So you can have multiple Gemini CLIs and then have kind of, they're all sending their inputs back to kind of one command center kind of orchestrator, where you can kind of see all the different sessions that someone has running at once and kind of see their status. So that's one cool use case. Yeah.
Very nice. Very cool. You want to talk about skills?
Yeah, we can, let's dive into skills. So I have one skill already configured. And if I actually jump back to Gemini CLI, you can list your skills with running /skills list. And you can see I have one skill configured currently, which is the 3JS expert. And first, we'll talk quickly about what are skills. First off, skills are not something that's specific to Gemini CLI. It's actually standardized. So agent skills are something that have a standard format. So if you're switching between providers, switching between Antigravity and Gemini CLI per se, you can actually bring your skills with you, which is really nice. And skills are essentially kind of bundled expertise is what I call them. So you can have Gemini CLI put on a specific kind of expert hat in whatever area your skill is, and that it will load that in just in time. So that progressive disclosure is the big thing about hooks. So instead of jamming everything into a single context file, you can actually have have it in skills. And then when a skill is triggered, it loads that context in, puts on that expertise for a certain task.
So that would be a big difference between, because some folks here might be familiar with custom commands, but not skills. So it sounds like that's how did you say it? Progressive disclosure is a big difference there.
Yeah. So custom commands are essentially just kind of pre-packaged prompts. So you run a / command, you execute that prompt, right? You're just passing it that prompt. It's going to execute it. Whereas skills really are meant to be kind of, I call them almost like a library book, right? They're like on the shelf. They're sitting there. You have the front matter, which is kind of YAML front matter or markdown front matter. And that's the name of the skill and the description. It's similar in a way to how agents see MCP tools, right? They see the name of the tool and the description. And then based on that, they decide to either call that tool. It's very similar with skills, right? So skills, the agent only sees the name of the skill and the description and any other kind of custom properties you pass it, like trigger words or things like that. So essentially it's in its back pocket, it's sitting on the shelf. And when it's triggered, when it says, okay, I need to activate this skill, it's going to go ahead and reach off that library and that manual and start reading through it just in time, like I said, progressive disclosure.
So custom commands are for the user to trigger. Skills are for the agent to trigger. Can a user manually trigger a skill? I feel like that would that make sense?
Yeah, we're working on that right now. So
Okay.
soon you will be able to just like type a skill name to kind of load in the skill automatically.
Yeah.
Right now it's based off of the agent deciding to when to call a skill.
Awesome.
Via the trigger. So we have an example here. I'm not someone who's an expert in Three.js, which is what our application is built on. So we went ahead and asked Gemini CLI to help us with this skill. We told it to go do some research on best practices and then put this into a skill. And we'll show you in a second how Gemini CLI actually has a built-in skill to actually go ahead and create skills. So if you just say, hey, I want to create a skill for writing documentation, can you help me do so? It's going to go ahead and actually walk you through the process. So all of this information you see here, all these reference files and things like that are only loaded in when you actually trigger the skill. So your context stays clean. It's not polluted until you get to the point of actually wanting to do something, which is really nice because you can have skills. You can have 100 skills, right? Sitting, waiting, not activated. That might only be useful in certain scenarios, like putting up a pull request. You could have a skill that has templates, the proper format for you. You could have things for, like I said, for docs writing. I have one for writing blogs with all my past blogs as reference. So things that you can just have them sit in the background and they're not wasting context or tokens.
That feels so powerful. So much of skills is about what folks might refer to as context engineering and like context management.
Yeah, exactly. So we can try to see if our Three.js expert will get activated. So we can say something like, can you check how our project does against Three.js best practices? And something like this, you should see that because we use words like Three.js, which are in our skill description, that Gemini CLI has successfully kind of activated this skill. It's going to go ahead and prompt us to load it in because you can load skills from like GitHub or other things through the Gemini skills install command. So you can actually just have one that's on the web or have one in a GitHub repository that all of your team can install. So they are meant to be kind of bundled so that they can be packaged up and shared.
I guess same question as last time. Any cool skills from the community you see? It feels like there's a pretty thriving online collection of skills.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones that I've been having fun with that went mega viral was the remotion best practices skill. I'm sure everyone saw videos of that. Essentially how you can create really cool videos, kind of these motion graphics just from prompts in your terminal. And I've done a few with Gemini CLI. It's pretty cool.
I did not see that. That's awesome.
So we can go ahead and actually we're seeing a sub agent get launched here, which is a couple built-in sub agents in Gemini CLI. One of them is the codebase investigator. There's another one for CLI help. So actually, if you ask Gemini CLI to go ahead and say, how do hooks work? Like if you want to learn more and you're not watching this video, or you want to go into the terminal afterwards and really dive deep, you can actually just prompt Gemini CLI saying, how do Gemini CLI hooks work? It has a built-in help with the docs for Gemini CLI that it can kind of read, and it'll actually iterate and feedback to you how to do things. So if you're trying to set up hooks, that's actually how I did the hooks for this video, is just prompted Gemini CLI, can you read how hooks work? And then, reference the docs to go ahead and create them.
I feel like that's such an important and often not discussed aspect of Gemini CLI, is not only can you use it to build things, but you can use it to teach you how to build things. And then you can also use it to teach yourself about how to use Gemini CLI.
Yeah, we're really trying to make that kind of feedback loop pretty quick. You shouldn't have to hop between going into Google Chrome and opening up the docs. We really want the CLI to be the place where it can pull its own information, be up to date. It can Google search, right? So you can even ask it to just go ahead and search the web, search its own docs, and it should be able to do everything contained inside the terminal, making the terminal even more powerful than it already is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so you can see we activated our skill. We have a few strengths, and then it has actually some areas for improvement from the 3JS skill. That it picked up the best practices, and it has a couple recommendations for us to go and clean up after this. So I think that's kind of the high level on skill. Is there any questions you have, Greg? Anything you want me to touch on a bit more?
I think you already touched on this, but just to double down on it, if somebody wants to get started with skills, the easiest way to do that is to ask Gemini CLI to help them build one.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just go ahead and actually do that right now before we dive into anything else. Let's just go ahead and say, like I mentioned, engineers, myself, I like working on features, working on cool things. The part that I dread is then having to write the documentation. So our app right now, Memory Wall, has 0 documentation. So let's go ahead and change that. Let's create a docs writer skill that follows best practices for writing clean and concise documentation for our Memory Wall application. And you'll see that, like we talked about, there's this built-in skill creator skill within Gemini CLI that actually will go ahead and trigger to kind of walk us through a flow. And we're actually seeing a different new feature in Gemini CLI actually pop up right now. And that's also launching this week, is the Ask User tool, which is a pretty powerful tool. I am a little bit biased, as I was the one who created this tool. So
you created this.
I added, it's very popular in some of the other providers, right? So the ability to have Gemini CLI have this interactive kind of question, be able to ask you questions that's not just you writing in text, right? Previously, it would just ask you in text. You'd have to type back the answers. Now we actually have this dialogue where it can be text questions, multiple choice questions, yes, no questions.
How does it decide when to ask questions and what categories of questions to ask?
Yeah, right now it's pretty much up to the model, right? So it's kind of, what task is it wanting? Is it something where it wants text input? Or is it something like, hey, I'm building a node application from scratch? It might ask you what kind of stack you want to use. Do you want to use mean stack? Do you want to use this technology? What database do you want? And it'll list you 4 options. So pretty cool.
This is great. I feel like the hallmark often of a good developer or a seasoned developer is that they ask a whole bunch of questions before they go off and start building. And it's nice to see Gemini CLI do a little bit of that as well.
Oh, look, this is one thing that whenever I write a blog, the tech writers always come back to me and say that I've used passive voice instead of active voice. So this is Gemini CLI is picking up and helping me, saving me some time here. And then it'll just ask you to review, and you can go ahead and fire that off. And then, now the model knows those answers, and it'll start to build out the skill for us and run through these flows.
Oh, that's great. And oh wow, look at that.
And it's creating a style guide, so we can go ahead right after this and upload a proper style guide or fix things based on our company or how we like to have voice or brand guidelines. But we'll just go ahead and accept the base one for now. And it's adding these reference to the skills. So again, these are all things that will not be loaded until the skill gets activated. It's doing kind of a guide template. Now it's kind of just going to clean up and activate the skill for us. So now it's writing that skill.md, which is kind of the key file for skills. And then it has like these different commands here to actually go ahead and validate it, make sure that it's in the proper format, that it's not have any syntax errors or any structuring issues. And you can actually see we're getting another question. So instead of Gemini CLI asking us to type things in, we're just getting this question dialog. So do we want to have it at our user scope? So skills can be user scoped, which means you have them in any project, or do you want them specific to your individual project? So just memory wall, or do we want it to be in all of my Gemini CLI sessions? So because this is kind of a doc skill purely for our project, we'll add it in the workspace scope. And then we're going to go ahead and run the command. And this is actually another interesting feature. I'm kind of stopping and pointing things out as we go, is that this is actually an interactive command, right? So it's waiting for my input right now. That's one thing that Gemini CLI can do that a lot of others can't, is it can actually run interactive commands that require user input. These would normally hang in other applications, but in Gemini CLI, you can actually do these interactive commands. And what's happening here is Gemini CLI is actually calling itself. It's calling one of its own command line commands to actually install the skill. So if we click on or press tab, we can shift focus. So you can see here it says tab to focus. If we click tab, we're now focused in on the interactive piece. We can go ahead and do Y, and we'll submit. And now that was actually calling that command and doing an interactive command within Gemini CLI. And then after this finishes, we just need to run /skills reload. And that will go ahead and activate our new skill. We can see down here in the bottom, we now have 2 skills. We previously had 1. And again, if we do /skills list, we can now see that Gemini CLI has access to this new docs writer skill that helps to write clean, concise documentation for our application.
I like that a lot. I especially like that /skills reload. I like you don't have to restart the CLI for that to take effect.
Yeah, exactly. You can just kind of stay in the flow, stay in your session, and just kind of create them on the go.
And now, presumably, when you would ask then the model to help you write some docs, it would know that it has that skill, and it would automatically invoke that skill in order to do that.
Yep. Can you write a docs page on our keyboard shortcut? And ideally, it's going to trigger the skill and load it in.
Look at that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the skills meta. And I would say the one thing that I would focus on for teams that to unlock the most benefit is not focus on individual skills for yourself. Really focus on skills that can be used across your team. Like a docs writer could be shared across your team. How your team reviews code or creates PRs, if you have specific formats, putting those into skills, checking them into your GitHub repository or whatever project you're using. And that way you're kind of having these skills unified across your team is a really big unlock. And if you go to the Gemini CLI GitHub repo, we have a few of those for like PR creator skill that anyone who's open source contributing. As soon as they say, hey, can we create a PR for whatever fix we're working on, they use like our defined flow, our defined template, and Gemini CLI will kind of scaffold out a PR exactly the way we need it for a quick review.
That feels like a really good tip there. And you touched on this briefly with some of the permissions, but there's going to be some skills, there's going to be some hooks that you might want to set up to work on all instances of Gemini CLI anywhere on your machine. There's going to be some that are just going to be project specific. I suspect there's even going to be times when you might want a skill or a hook just for yourself, but you don't want to commit it to the repo. You don't want everyone on that project to have that, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you have some specific kind of jargon or coding logic or things that you personally do, but your teammates might not want to adopt or do, you can have kind of your own personal user skills that are Jack skills, where it does things how I like things, or it talks like me when it's writing docs or things like that, right?
Yeah. No, and I think this is all. Both of these are great, and I think both of these are just really interesting examples of trying to have more consistency in the behavior of these tools that are so powerful. But sometimes the question is, how do you reach in and just grab a little bit more control, or how do you have more consistency across the whole team if a bunch of folks are using these tools? And it feels like both of these just give you a little bit more power in the behavior, directing the behavior of Gemini CLI.
Yeah, totally. And it's like trying to make things more automated versus you having to manually do things and hop back in to do things exactly how you like it. It's the agent out of the box might not know all of those things about how your team operates or how to do things the most efficiently. So really giving it skills, giving it hooks are ways that you can customize things to your specific project and have things work exactly how your team does.
We had a question. I believe it's Skevmet from YouTube asked, what's the best way to maintain and share skills with the team? Is that checking it into the repo?
Yeah. So if you're doing things that are in a GitHub repository, exactly that. You just create a skills folder and drop skills in there. And that way, when anyone is working on that project with Gemini CLI or with a different provider, they'll get access to those skills and they'll be able to trigger them and activate them on the fly. And then you'll start to see there's lots of different places, like I believe it was Vercel. Vercel has a NPX skills where they have a kind of a registry going right now, where you can, I think they have thousands of skills already that people are contributing, they're upvoting, so that you can, like if you want the Remotion best practices skill, it's on there. You just do npx add skills and the name of the skill, and it will install it. And you can publish skills there as well. And so kind of community is really growing around skills right now. And there's lots of areas to publish so that something that works well for you can be shared with others.
And a question from, my apologies, is a long name from YouTube. So I'm just going to preface it to Ogundi and not try the rest of it. Are skills compatible across different CLIs? So does it, like, can we use skills here that are created for other CLIs?
Yeah, totally. So you'll see we're starting to standardize a bit more. Skills are still pretty new. They just got standardized a few months ago. And before that, you'll see like I have this in a .gemini folder, skills. We've also added support for .reading from .agents/skills. So if I change this to .agents, it would still work and get pulled into Gemini CLI. And that's kind of our standardized path is .agent/skills. Other providers will read from that as well, so that you can have your skills in just one folder and not have to rename or do symlinks or things like that. So if you are using different applications, different providers, .agents/skills is the main one that most folks support.
Amazing. Very cool. So exciting to see how quickly everything is progressing here and how we keep inventing all these new tools to help us work with these. All right. Speaking of, earlier we were talking about asking questions before going off and developing. You want to talk a little bit about plan mode?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about plan mode. Plan mode is currently in preview. I'll show you in a second how to enable it if you do want to get started with it before it's on by default. It will be on by default next week, I believe, on Tuesday. So it is in preview. You can try it out. We love if you have tried it out, give us feedback, let us know what we can change before we kind of launch it for good. But plan mode is essentially trying to fill the gap of kind of a read-only mode where the tools like editing, writing files are disabled, and it's just going to research, come up with a plan, and then give that plan back to you to provide feedback, to iterate on, things like that. So that way that you're not just typing something out, having Gemini CLI jump into editing files. It's actually going to take a step back, look at the code base, read through everything, and create a plan that then you can execute on.
Can you give a feel for the types of projects or when a developer might want to use plan mode as opposed to the default mode?
Yeah, for me, plan mode is when things are a bit more ambiguous. You might not have a clear, easy to define workflow or spec that you're trying to implement. So where you want to maybe have plan mode go out, explore the code base, give you 2 or 3 potential solutions, ask for your feedback. Hey, which one makes the most sense here for the project? How do you like this, or this? And it's really just kind of the ability to make sure that all the context and all the requirements are looked at, the code is thoroughly looked through before we go ahead and start implementing. And the one thing that's nice about plan mode too is that it actually supports read-only MCP servers. So MCP servers that annotate any tools as read-only can also be accessed during plan mode. So the GitHub MCP server can actually go ahead and read issues from GitHub. The Gemini CLI extension for Workspace also has those type hints. So you can go and read Google Docs, pull in Google Sheets, things like that, pull in that context during the planning stage before you agree with Gemini CLI to go ahead and implement.
So I like that way of thinking about plan mode. Plan mode is read-only mode. Plan mode can use read-only MCP tools as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'll show it off. In our current memory wall application, we don't really have a way of linking different items on our board, right? So we're doing this live stream. Maybe we want to link, Jack, Greg to Google Cloud, or do live stream note or something like that, or kind of have it look like an evidence board where we can tie different memories together. Maybe we're on a trip, certain images are all from that trip. We can link them, have some nice visual red string on our memory wall. So let's see if we can go ahead and implement that with plan mode so that when we click on different items, it links them together. How does that sound?
Oh, sorry, it's on me. That sounds great.
So if you are trying plan mode before it is released, you can just go to settings and look up plan and set that to true. Just toggle it. I have it on true now. You'll just go ahead and click enter on it to go ahead and enable plan mode. This will also be, I will say, there are people who don't necessarily want plan mode. So Gemini CLI, when you type in things like plan, can actually decide to enter plan mode on your behalf. Like it'll prompt you, hey, is this something you want to enter plan mode for and get into kind of that read-only state? We do understand that there are a lot of people out there who have a certain planning kind of workflow already developed. Like personally, sometimes I just like having a spec.md markdown file that I'm kind of asking Gemini CLI to iterate with me on. Hey, can we add this to the spec? Can we keep going? So this will be a way to disable plan mode as well once we launch on by default. So that's just something to point out because there are folks who might not want this by default. So then once you have it enabled, you can just do Shift Tab, and you'll see down here the color changes to green on the little indicator, and you'll see that you're in plan mode. So that's just a Shift Tab to easily switch between the different modes in Gemini CLI. There's also auto accept edits, which for writing code or editing code will kind of just approve editing those files. It won't allow any shell commands or anything like that, but it will accept edits and write files. So that's kind of how you can cycle through. You can also just do /plan and then type out a prompt, and it will kind of start off that prompt in plan mode as well. So let's just go ahead and start typing out. We want to add a new feature to our memory wall application. We want to be able to link different notes / photos together. When when one image is selected and we click on another one, let's say that links it together. And then we'll just tell it what that should look like visually. And we'll just say that's a nice red realistic string connecting the 2 pins together. And then we'll just say, let's plan out this feature. You don't have to say that when you're in plan mode, but if you were in regular mode and you said something like, let's plan out this feature, that would toggle the enter plan mode tool so that you can go between the different modes. Gemini CLI can also figure out when you're trying to plan and go ahead and do that for you. So now it'll just go ahead and start to read through. And the one thing about plan mode is that it's a different system prompt. So it's not going to behave exactly the same. It's really more on that gathering information, trying to load in the context and figuring out what you're asking for. And you can see we're actually using the Flash model right now. So it's actually quite speedy. Right now, I believe currently in the preview, it just defaults to whatever model you have selected. But we're about to be adding, for when we launch, the ability to actually choose a different model for planning specifically. So if you wanted to use only Gemini Pro for planning, but for the default mode, use Flash, that will be supported.
So this has come up with a plan. I've my first question, what does it do with that plan? Does it write it to file? Does it just store it in context?
Yeah, right now it writes it to a temporary plan file in the Gemini temp directory.
Okay.
In the future, this will also be, I believe, a kind of a .gemini plans folder.
Okay.
So that let's say we stopped this session, we came back 2 days from now, we would then be able to just go /plans, look through our plans, and pick one that we did a few days ago. So that is the goal for the first implementation. It's just doing it to a temporary file. So
should I clear my context in between the planning and the execution phase?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that is kind of a hot debate, I would say, right now. People look at it both ways because during the plan, you've done all the research. If it's a very technical plan, like you're saying, maybe it's going through this for 10+ minutes, maybe you're at 50% of your context window left by the time the plan's done, then maybe you want to clear it and just point it at the plan from the start so that it has fresh context, it has the plan and continues on. But at the same time, the flip side of it is that you then might go and reread some files that you already read, right, Greg? It might need some of that context. So it's kind of currently, I think, up in the air what people like to do more, whether they want to clear and start over or start with fresh context for the plan, for the implementation, or continue on.
I think the answer to so many of these questions is it depends. Or
a lot of it is user preference for sure, and how you want to do things.
And user preference, the complexity of the project or feature you're working on, working with a group, individual vibe coding versus greenfield versus a big complex pre-existing project. Like there's just so much nuance in all of these things. And then tell me here, okay, so it created a plan and now it's asking, hey, are you ready to start the implementation? It might be a little jarring for folks. Hey, I did plan mode, but then now at the end of plan mode, it's asking me, do I want to edit files? So could you talk us through what it's doing now?
Yeah. So essentially, you're going to go step through the plan. You can read through it, see the different steps, and then there's a few different options here. So if we see something in the plan that we want it to tweak or it's not how we're liking, you can just type feedback here directly, enter it, and then it will iterate, update the plan, and kind of give you the same dialogue again with the updated version. Otherwise, you have two other options. So you have the more restrictive one, which is kind of yes, go into the regular default mode, which is where you're approving edits and write files. And then you have the second one, which is the automatically accept edits. And this is the other mode that you saw when I did Shift Tab that was yellow and it was auto accept. And what that means is the writing files and editing files get accepted automatically, right? So essentially, again, like we just said, everything's user preference.
Yeah.
If you're really confident in the plan that was put out, it's very detailed, everything looks good, then you might say, okay, let's just auto accept edits and let's run wild with this, right? So we'll do that here. But if it's something that you want to kind of keep an eye on, you want to one by one make sure the code is super high quality, you might want to tweak how some of the code is, then you would do manually accept. But we'll do auto accept, and you can see now we are going to go ahead and start writing some of these files. Oh, I just switched modes by accident by tabbing. So now you can see when we're in the yellow mode here at the bottom, we're in auto accept edits mode. And you'll see that we're not having to confirm these tool calls for edits and writes. They're just going to go ahead and go through. So it's adding in some new functionality for the link that we asked it to plan out.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. And this, like you said, this is in preview now. If folks want it now, they can update their settings to see preview features, and then this will be released next week.
Yeah, exactly. It's currently in preview. We're still tweaking some things, like some of the colors or some of the system prompt might be getting tweaked a little bit to perform better. So yeah, give us your feedback, try it out, let us know, and help kind of shape the launch of it. If there's certain things that we're missing, let us know. We'll get them in there before next week.
And they'll see it if they're using the nightly build, right?
Yeah, so we have 3 different kind of release channels. There is the stable version, the preview version, and the nightly version. So stable goes out every week. It's the previous week's preview. It gets promoted. So essentially in the preview, if there's anything that gets broken or doesn't work exactly how we want it, there's kind of that week leeway before things get promoted. And then nightly is essentially just takes a snapshot every day of the code. So if you're feeling super adventurous and want to be on the bleeding edge, you can npm install the nightly version.
Amazing. You want to hit some questions?
Yeah, sure. Let's hit some questions. And while we do that, I will just flip over and see if we can see if our feature works.
Oh, great. Oh yeah, let's see.
Moment of truth. Oh, looks like we're not getting the links. So let's head back over and let's say you can actually try to use our Playwright MCP server to test things out when things don't work.
Tell me about the Playwright MCP server.
Yeah, this is an open source one. It's one that I like to use for when you're actually building applications that have a UI or are in the browser. Essentially, it allows Gemini CLI through Playwright to open up like a local host, a browser, and actually click around, test things out, and then see how functionality works. So that when I was actually building out this application, I essentially just told Gemini CLI, use the Playwright MCP server to test out the UI, make sure everything works, so that things like this would just be kind of iterative, right? It would add a new button, add a new like clickable thing, feature to the application. Playwright would go test it out. If something doesn't work, Playwright says that back to Gemini CLI. Hey, this button's a dead link, or this thing's not working. Keep iterating, and then it helps improve. This
feels like a great segue to the question from Aventura on YouTube. Should I stop using extensions then? Are they still the same thing as skills? Are skills and extensions the same? And let's throw MCP into the mix. There's a lot of ways to add functionality on here. Could you give the brief overview on MCP versus skills versus extensions?
For sure. Yeah, good. I'll flip over to our extensions gallery. I would say no, it's not. Skills don't replace extensions. I would say, if anything, they actually make extensions more powerful. So for folks who are not aware of what Gemini CLI extensions are, they're a way that you can kind of bundle up all this functionality into a package that users can just install with a single click or a single command, right? So like we said, checking things into GitHub repositories for a team is one way, but also bundling them as extensions is another way to share that out to other people, right? So you can see there's a lot of companies we have skills for. The conductor extension is one that a lot of people really enjoy for kind of spec-driven deployment in Gemini CLI. And again, there's just like this install command, and you can see that it brings in context, it brings in custom commands, but you can also bring in skills. And what that means is a user can install this extension, they get the MCP server, skills, whatever that extension has bundled, all in one. So I actually think it makes extensions more powerful, if anything.
Another question while you're on the screen is from YQECEA about conductor. And I saw the conductor extension on there. The question was, I don't understand the difference between conductor and plan mode. Which one is deeper?
Yeah, so there's kind of a little bit of nuance there. Conductor is like, it's actually going to be leveraging the built-in plan mode and the built-in ask user tool very shortly. So it's not necessarily one or the other. Conductor will actually use plan mode. But what conductor does is it's a very, very kind of heavy spec-driven development. So it does kind of these iterations of planning, writing specs, iterating on them, saving different states, so that if you kind of leave and come back, conductor has like a snapshot of your context of what you were working on last. So I think it's really like, if you're going for a really big migration or a very technical feature, maybe conductor is for you. If you're just trying to plan something out that's pretty scoped, plan mode should get 90% of the people there. But if you're really diving deep, conductor is great. And I can't say too much, but in the future, there might be a version of like conductor might be built into Gemini CLI so that you can just go between kind of plan mode and like a spec-driven deployment mode.
I like that. How's Gemini CLI doing there?
Oh, let's just see. We got to install the playwright. We already have the MCP server running. It's just going to go ahead and do the test suite, and we'll actually be able to start doing some playwright tests.
For folks who haven't played with this before, of hooking a browser up to their agent of choice, this felt magical the first time I ever saw it. And it's also a feature of Antigravity. Antigravity can use Chrome to test the apps that it's building. And there was a question here from YouTube I'm just going to shorten this to heck. My apologies. It says, regarding Playwright, could you talk about the difference between Gemini CLI using Playwright versus Chrome Web MCP?
Yeah. I would say Chrome DevTools MCP is awesome. If you're trying to actually kind of look at the logs, performance, seeing why things are slow, the Chrome DevTools MCP server is the one for you. If you're just trying to kind of automate testing, clicking through the browser, the Playwright MCP is kind of like the lighter weight Chrome DevTools is how I would say it. So for myself, it's essentially just testing is the dev server running. Can I click through things? That's kind of where I use Playwright. If you're trying to hammer down on the performance of your site, trying to look through the logs, inspect things, certain like elements on the page, that's kind of where I would do the
Chrome Web MCP is so powerful for front-end debugging.
Yeah, it is. And like, let me see if I can, let me just tell it to. Test our dev server is running. I already know it is, but oh, it's trying to use my hook. There we go. So you can see I didn't open that browser. That was
so Gemini CLI just opened up this browser.
Yeah, exactly. It just opened up this browser using the playwright MCP, and if I wanted to say, you know, click on this button, I could actually just instruct it through Gemini CLI in the terminal to test out different elements and navigate through the UI.
In the background, it looks like, yeah, okay, great. So you can now give it instructions on how to test this app, and Gemini CLI can do that for you in the browser.
Yeah, and you can see it returns like the different background elements, and it can see different UI elements as well.
Yeah.
Let's see if it fixed our clicking ability. No pressure here, Gemini CLI.
That looks like it worked.
Yeah, looks like we can now just start linking things together.
Incredible. Incredible.
Here we go. Don't necessarily know if those three are technically related. Not sure groceries go with Iceland, but there we go.
I don't, man, it is so easy to forget how wild this is. You know, you've done DevRel for a long time. How many live coding demos have you done in the past in your career where you meticulously rehearse so that you can make sure you can write the proper 20 minutes or 20 lines of code, right? And way simple features. And here you've got this app you built in 20 minutes before. You just deployed this non-trivial feature live on a call while talking about other things the whole time. And it's just absolutely incredible, like what these tools are capable of.
I was a little scared there. If I'm being fully honest, the live demos are always, you kind of hope for the best. But here, you actually mentioned deploying it live. This is actually still in our dev server. Okay. Let's do that. Let's deploy, or let's commit. Let's just tell Gemini CLI to commit those changes. It's working, and deploy. So it's going to go ahead. It's going to go ahead and stage all the changes. And now it's going to run npm run deploy. And this is, again, going to actually use the Firebase command, Firebase CLI, to go ahead and actually deploy this. And we can actually see it here in the shell command that the deploy is complete. So now let's go back. Let me refresh our deployed one. And we can actually now see that our links are there.
So
and
cool.
Greg, you remember to walk the dog.
And folks, it's so tiny, but you can see up in the address bar, this is localhost. Or sorry, this is not localhost. This is deployed.
Yeah, and again, people can go try this out. If you're on the call, head over to the link. You should now also be able to kind of add different items and link them together.
Yeah, and you deploy this on Firebase. I think a lot of folks are vibe coding stuff, then they get it running locally, and then they want to share it with friends, and they're not really sure where to go from that. Could you talk a little bit about why Firebase makes for a good option for deploying?
Yeah, for me, Firebase is kind of for anything that I want all in one. It's awesome, right? You can have your database. I can have my website hosted with Firebase web hosting. I can even deploy things to Cloud Functions if I want to. It's basically prompting. I just asked Gemini CLI, can you add, Google login authentication to the site? It now knows who I am up here in the top right corner. If you go to the site yourself, it'll ask you to log in to create your own personal board so that people can't see this. They see their own memory wall when they join. And again, this is just prompting, right? And that Firebase has a CLI, which because I have the Firebase CLI installed on my local machine, it means Gemini CLI also has access to it, right? The tools I have access to, Gemini CLI has access to. So it knows how to navigate them. It can kind of add things to, it can add databases to Firebase. It can add the authentication all through just leveraging the Firebase CLI. It doesn't necessarily have to have all that knowledge. It can kind of find its way there.
I had this experience recently too, and where I had not deployed to Firebase before and was so impressed by just installing the Firebase CLI locally. I think I maybe had to auth in and that was it. And then just let Gemini CLI know that the Firebase CLI is there. And then when you get done with the thing, you just say, hey, deploy this, and it knows how to do it. And it just worked. And really, it feels like it closes the loop on a lot of the vibe coding stuff.
Totally.
It's a couple other questions. Let's do this one. So a lot of excitement around anti-gravity as well. There's obviously a lot of intersection. How do you think about when maybe someone might want to reach for anti-gravity, when they might want to reach for Gemini CLI?
Yeah, totally. Great question. They're really complementary tools. And as we start to standardize on things like skills we mentioned, having a similar folder, we're really going to be working hard to kind of making it so that wherever you go, your processes, your plans, your skills, maybe even your MCP servers, like they can all follow you between the two. I think right now kind of where I see anti-gravity being really beneficial is like its agent manager, that kind of pane where you can orchestrate different tasks in parallel, as well as it having the ability to actually kind of have a built-in version of kind of like Playwright and Chrome Dev Tools, right? So it can actually spin up its own UI as well, take screenshots and validate. So things that we set up manually here in Gemini CLI, Antigravity actually has some of those features out of the box. Whereas kind of Gemini CLI is more, if you're in the command line, you're wanting to kind of, I won't say like, it's almost like a minimalistic mode, right? So like we're just in the terminal, we're just sending commands, checking in on the progress. It's kind of a focused heads down driven deployment. Whereas kind of anti-gravity is more kind of a UI IDE based, but this is the theme, I guess, of this video. It's always preference. So we're just going to do our best to make it easy to kind of switch between the two. In an ideal world, I would love to see us get to the point where I can create a plan in Gemini CLI, open anti-gravity, and like iterate on the plan there, or vice versa, to have the products really play nice together. So working towards that.
I think it's so important too to sort of double down on the personal preference, is to stress how incredibly new this entire class of developer tools is. And so much of this is evolving, and also is, again, just going to depend on like, what do you like doing and what kind of projects are you working on? And so strong +1, I prefer working out of the CLI. I find for the stuff that I personally am working on often are simpler, smaller projects, often greenfield projects. And I don't need to necessarily, like, to the extent that I'm editing text, a lot of times I'm editing prompts or editing commands or editing skills files or whatnot, as opposed to diving deep into the code. So a lot of the IDE stuff is a little superfluous, but a lot of folks are working on more complex stuff, and they need to get in there with a scalpel. But I think it varies so much from person to person, and it would be presumptive for anyone to say, you know, here's the matrix where if you have this, and this, you definitely need this tool over this one. Like, we're all sort of figuring this stuff out as we go.
Yeah, it's total preference, and there's always going to be something that someone likes better, and your pal or colleague might like the other one better, right? So just making sure that you can do similar things in both, I think, is kind of where we're working towards.
Oh, looks like my camera died, so I want to switch over real quick. But that's probably we'll switch to the not as good one while we wrap up here. So maybe that's a good time to wrap this up. So folks who want to learn more, could you point us in the direction of a few different resources?
Yeah, totally. We have a bunch of different resources. The documentation is one that's great for if you're looking to dive deep on a specific feature, or looking for the reference documentation on how hooks work, the different skills, how to go about those. If you're looking to get started, you can check out last week's live stream. We also have a course in partnership with Deep Learning that's totally free. That's like an hour and a half that will walk through a lot of the basics to get you comfortable with, context, built-in commands, MCP servers. You're like, hey, how did he configure the Playwright MCP server? That course will walk you through it with some really fun use cases. So definitely check it out. I think we'll link it below.
Yeah, a big +1 on that deep learning course. You all did a great job on that, and it's really accessible. I think each of the chapters on it are just like 5-7 minutes. I mean, it's so accessible, right?
Yeah, it's pretty quick. It's pretty speedy. So if you are having a few minutes here and there, you can kind of work your way through it within a week.
Yeah, I think the word course can feel intimidating to folks, but this is a very digestible, very accessible thing for folks who are just getting up and running. And again, ask Gemini, ask Gemini CLI, like just get it installed and start asking it what it can do. It knows a lot about itself, and can really walk you through building stuff. But I think the best way, analogy I often use is like I picked up woodworking and bought some power tools, and like I could watch all the YouTube videos about circular saws that I wanted to, but until I got some scrap wood and started just like cutting some stuff, like you're just going to learn so much more there. Like read a little bit so you don't cut your fingers off, but but at some point you just got to start playing with it.
I agree. I think like for things, some of these concepts too, like hooks, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, when would I use that?
Yes.
And it's really just actually creating one. Like I was actually brainstorming for this and thinking of doing like how you have personal assistants or personal coaches for working out. Like I was thinking of making my own, Gemini CLI personal coach, where it's a hook. And if I haven't committed or haven't done things, it will like on startup kind of, hey, I don't see any commits in your history the last 2 days. Where you been? Or things like that. And that's all possible through hooks, skills, extensions. So.
Yeah, agreed. I think until you've really, a lot of the follow-on tools, whether it's custom commands, hooks, extensions, skills, were created in sort of response to desires people felt when using the standard tool. And so the need for those might not make as much sense to folks who have never used them before, but that once you start using them and you build, vibe code something simple or whatnot, then you'll start understanding better. Like, oh yeah, it would be nice if I could, every time it was about to run RM, I had like a hook that asked like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Right. Things like that. And so, yeah, once you just get your hands dirty, I think it's absolutely the best way to play with this stuff. Any suggestions for folks on, if they are just getting started, how do they do so in a way that feels really safe to them? A lot of folks might feel a little bit of anxiety over letting the LLM run loose. Like, what are some best practices just for getting up and running to make sure they don't, metaphorically cut off their fingers?
Yeah, I think starting in the regular mode or plan mode is your best bet.
Yeah.
Be manually accepting all the tool calls and confirmations. And then we do have things like policy engine where like things like ls or certain commands that you deem are safe. For instance, I have like git status, git pull, like things that are like really safe. You can add those slowly and build up like a policy file or like an allowed tools file where it's kind of once you've gotten comfortable and you don't want to have those confirmations all the time, it's potentially like bothering you, you start adding those to that file and they kind of like slowly kind of understanding what you feel safe with. And I will do one final plug before we wrap up here too, that like Gemini CLI is fully open source on GitHub. The code is all there right down to the actual system prompts. So if you do feel like, hey, I would love this feature in Gemini CLI, go ahead, open a feature request. And if you're feeling adventurous and you want to like contribute, it's open source and we have external contributors, like hundreds of them contributing to the project. So if that's something that piques people's interest, definitely go check out the GitHub. There's like a help wanted label on issues that are like good first ones to tackle or ones that are like we're looking for community help with. So I definitely recommend people go check it out.
Incredible. And one other place where folks can learn about it is at Next, which is happening in April. We're going to have thousands of developers there. We're going to have a lot of talks and content. It's going to be in Las Vegas at Mandalay Bay. And you're going to be there, right?
Yep. Most of the Gemini CLI team will be there. So it's definitely a place to check out.
All right. We are on track to sell out that show. So if y'all are interested in joining us in Vegas for Next, sign up ASAP. And we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for joining us for Google Cloud Live. Next week, Steph's going to be back and talking to the Antigravity team. So a lot of you had some awesome questions about Antigravity. And if you want to learn more about that, you can join us at the same time next week. And we will see you all then. Jack, thank you so much for joining. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.